Hello, I'm Pastor Matthew Woods from Grace Lutheran Church in New Albany, Indiana, and this is the weekly devotion for October 4th, 2021, the beginning of another month. Here we are. Today's title is Forgiveness Big Enough for a King. Now, for those of you that know me, this is not going to be a big surprise, but here's a little secret. I am accident prone. I could give a litany of trouble I managed to find for myself. I have managed to put my left thumb in a table saw not once, but twice, same thumb, and managed to keep it, thank goodness. It's still there. I don't know how, by the grace of God. I have also managed to spill an entire flagon or pitcher of wine off the front of the church altar twice. I have run my vehicle, two different cars in fact, into the back of another vehicle while they are waiting in the yield lane, thinking they were taking off. I didn't look back to see if they actually left, and well, thought I had my opening, but turns out they didn't go and smashed into the back of their car. Doesn't work so well. Insurance company loves me. I've managed to accidentally shoot my left leg with a pneumatic nail gun. Shot a 2-inch nail right all the way into the head. We were doing a roofing job with my father-in-law, walking around with a finger on my trigger and snapped it right against the leg, and it went. Thankfully, I missed my kneecap just by a half inch. I managed to pinch my hand between rocks. I've dropped things on my feet, and sometimes my accident proneness, if you will, spills over onto my poor wife. We have a 40-pound dog, Ruffles, who once ran after a piece of dirt I just, without thinking, tossed into the grass. Well, she chases things. And she happened to be tied to a 30-foot leash, which was being held at the other end by my poor little wife, who was not seeing or expecting anything to happen. When that dog hit the end of that leash, it went taut. It stretched her out. It pulled Trisha clean off her feet, launched her horizontally like Superwoman, 10 feet off the ground, landing on the ground with her arms still outstretched, attached to that leash, wondering what just happened to her. She landed hard in the yard, no thanks to me. And, well, it was not a comfortable moment, let's put it that way. I'm glad she wasn't hurt. I'm very sorry that it happened. Thankfully, she was gracious and forgiving as we nervously laughed it off. Well, we can laugh about it now, nervously still. Needless to say, she's okay. Folks, I am not always at my best. Truthfully, none of us, I would say, are always at our best. The good news is that someone is gracious and forgiving. That, of course, being Jesus. He is more gracious and forgiving than all of us. The good news this morning is even when someone is at their absolute worst, God's forgiveness is at his best. Good news is this. We are all about this morning, God's forgiveness. Not even the godliest of kings, after God's own heart, can escape being prone to bad decisions, can escape doing dumb things, can escape being at their worst. When David hit rock bottom with Bathsheba, the Lord was still able to bring forgiveness to David. Thank God for that. Please consider now our text for the day from Psalm 32, 1 through 5. Now this psalm was written by a very repentant King David following the incident with Bathsheba. Nathan confronts him about that sin against Bathsheba. But here's what he says in the psalm. Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me, my strength was sapped, as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and you did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 1 through 14, Nathan the prophet confronts David about David's sin. He goes on the Lord's behalf and reviews all the stuff that David did down in detail, and making it very clear that none of this was hidden from God. He saw what he was doing. David loved the Lord, but with Bathsheba, he was not at his best. He really blew it. It was more than an accident. It was sin. And that's why God had to confront him on this subject. That's why Nathan comes. You see, David coveted Bathsheba. There you go, 10th commandment stuff. David lusted for Bathsheba and committed adultery, 6th commandment stuff. David stole her from a faithful man, Uriah, who wasn't even a native Jew. He was a Hittite. Nonetheless, he was faithful to the army of Israel and to David, and to the God of Israel for that matter. David lied in an attempt to cover up his sin and pretend it didn't happen. David committed murder by having Uriah killed on the war front, on the battlefield. And when Nathan told the parable of the rich man who stole the beloved lamb of the neighbor who only had one lamb, David was quick to condemn such a man. Thankfully, God was not so quick to condemn David, who was the man being described in this parable. You see, David compounded his sins one after the other. It was willful, it was deliberate. David was not at his best by a long shot. Not what we saw before, not what we talked about last week. Not even close. And God called Nathan out, making it very clear that he wasn't getting away with anything. There were no secrets here. The Lord also made it clear that David's actions would have lasting consequences upon his household, upon the kingdom, and upon himself. Just like the incident with Trisha, all three would be pulled right off their feet suddenly. They'd suddenly find themselves pulled over by forces that they didn't even see coming, thanks to David. But the critical verse is verse 13, and the one we want to note the most this morning. It says in verse 13, "Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You're not going to die." Thankfully, the Lord's forgiveness was big enough, even for the huge sins of David, the ones he committed. The Lord's forgiveness is bigger than our worst moment. And the best news is that we are saved because of it. We will not die, but live in and through Jesus' cross and resurrection, because he has forgiven us. The cross was great enough to bring about such forgiveness that all the sins of the world for all time at the same time were placed upon Jesus, and he died for those sins. So when we feel like we have committed one sin too many, the Lord can forgive. When our hearts are broken because of something we know is wrong, the Lord can forgive you. When we've been the prodigal who distant and indifferent and selfish, and we wonder, can we go back home? Remember, of course, the father and the father's reaction in the parable that Jesus told in Luke 15. God can and will forgive you. When we feel unworthy and we see ourselves as outcasts, the Lord seeks us out as friends. He goes after the one who is lost, remember? God can forgive you. And as the psalm says, blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. You know, that blessed, the one who's blessed is us, like the blessed are the peacemakers. Same word that's being used there. It implies a connection to the Lord. The psalm also encourages us not to try and hide those sins, because hiding the sins is bad for us. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. Verse 3. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped in the heat of summer. You know, like those hot days where you just put at your limit, and you're feeling faint, not enough water. You know, that's what he's describing there. Holding on to your sin is toxic for our hearts and for our souls. Guilt becomes acid in our hearts. He is physically weak from holding on to it, holding back from God something that could not be hidden anyway. And so it is a relief for David to confess it. And then as soon as he does, David feels freedom. I said, I will confess my transgressions unto the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. You see, we all sin. We are all not always at our best. Sometimes we launch into an impulse, as David did, and logic of it all gets lost in a fog of emotions or other things. Our hearts and minds lose focus without true understanding of ourselves. And we end up sitting next to the Apostle Paul in Romans 7. I don't understand myself, what I do. For what I want to do, I don't do. The good I want to do, I don't do that. I do the stuff I hate to do. That chapter. I just don't understand myself, Paul says. And yet Paul knew and depended on the forgiveness of Jesus to overcome sin living within himself. And he understood that all well. He knew that Jesus' forgiveness was forgiveness big enough even for a king like David. The same is said of us. God's forgiveness is bigger than anything you or I could throw at him. Now, we can trust in the Lord in this. So, confess your sins to the Lord. Don't try to hide them. He already knows they're there. And he still loves you. Keep that in mind. He's always more ready to forgive you than we are ready to ask because he loves you so much. So may the Lord renew a right spirit within us this week. And may we find peace in our own hearts as David did. And may we know just how much the Lord loves us in this. And so now, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you with his favor and forever and always give you his peace in Jesus. I'm Pastor Woods. Thanks for being with us today. God bless your week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.